The afternoon sun poured molten gold over Brookhaven, casting the city in long shadows that stretched like fingers across the cracked pavement. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, and the faint scent of exhaust clung to the air. Horns blared in the distance, their sharp notes blending with the rumble of buses and the rhythmic hiss of crosswalk signals. Adrian Cole, a man whose face had appeared on the covers of business journals and whose name stirred whispers in corporate boardrooms, stepped out of a black sedan that gleamed like a polished mirror. His navy suit was cut to perfection, his shoes immaculate, his tie knotted with the precision of a man used to control. Yet control was slipping from him in ways no one could see. His jaw was tight, his movements slower than usual. He hadn't eaten since dawn. He hadn't truly slept in days. The weight of a failed deal, unending decisions, and the silent pressure of people's expectations pressed against his chest like an invisible stone. He glanced at his watch, and then at the pedestrian light ahead. It blinked green. He started forward. The soundscape of the city dulled with each step, traffic fading to a distant hum, conversations turning into muffled echoes. His breath came shallow and uneven. The light above him felt harsher, almost blinding, as if the sun itself had turned against him. Halfway across the street, his vision wavered, and a strange, hollow ringing filled his ears. His knees buckled, the world tilted, the pavement rushed toward him. Then, impact, the heat of the asphalt seeped into his cheek. For a heartbeat there was nothing but stillness. A chorus of brakes screamed, tires screeched, a horn split the air like a blade, a driver swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding him. People slowed, their shadows crossing his body. A few bent their heads together, murmuring. Someone asked under their breath, "Is he drunk?" Others stepped around him without stopping, glancing at their phones, shaking their heads. Across the street, 6-year-old Emily Dawson froze in mid-step. Her pink sneakers squeaked slightly as she stopped. Her hazel eyes widened at the sight of the man in the navy suit lying motionless in the road. Her heart thudded fast, the way it did when thunder cracked close to her window at night. But she didn't think about fear. She didn't think about strangers. She just knew someone needed her. She tightened her grip on the worn stuffed rabbit clutched in her left hand and darted toward the crosswalk. Her backpack bounced wildly against her shoulders, the zipper half open so that a crumpled drawing peeked out. Cars idled, drivers watching with mild irritation as the small figure ran. Emily's sneakers slapped against the pavement. She reached the man, dropped to her knees beside him, and set her rabbit down gently on the ground. "Mister, wake up, please," she said, her voice trembling but urgent. Adrian's eyelids fluttered, but his lips didn't move. Emily's small hands shook as she reached out, giving his arm a cautious shake. Nothing. She slid her backpack off and unzipped it. From inside, she pulled a half-full plastic water bottle, the one her mom had given her that morning before school. "Here," she whispered, tilting it toward his lips with careful hands. A trickle of water touched his mouth. His throat moved faintly, a slow reflex of swallowing. Emily glanced up at the cars, still edging around them. Her voice sharpened with frustration. "Help! Somebody! Help him!" she shouted, her cry breaking across the noise of the city. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the growl of a motorcycle engine cut through the tension. A rider in a scuffed leather jacket braked hard, kicked down the stand, and swung off the bike. "I'm calling an ambulance," he said, already pulling out his phone. Emily stayed exactly where she was. She reached for Adrian's hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his much larger ones. "I won't leave you," she whispered, holding on as if her grip alone could keep him there. Sirens began to rise in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder, weaving into the hum of the city. Emily leaned closer to his ear. "It's okay, mister," You'll be fine. I'm right here. When the paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, lifting Adrian onto a stretcher with practiced hands. But as they wheeled him toward the ambulance, Emily trotted alongside, still holding his hand, until the very last second before the doors closed. She stood on the curb as the ambulance pulled away, the sunlight glinting off the metal until it disappeared around the corner. Her rabbit was back in her arms now, pressed tightly against her chest. She didn't know the man's name. She didn't know he was wealthy or powerful or anything at all. She just knew she'd tried her best to help. 2 days later, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor was the first sound Adrian heard as his mind floated back to waking. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the room. Light leaked in from a gap between pale curtains. His head felt heavy, but when he turned, he saw his longtime assistant, Mark, sitting beside the bed, relief softening the man's usually sharp features. "You're awake," Mark said quietly. "We almost lost you." Adrian's voice was hoarse. "What happened?" Mark hesitated before answering, as if the truth might sound strange. "You collapsed in the street. Dozens of people saw you, but no one helped." Adrian's brow furrowed, his breath catching. "No one?" Mark's voice softened. "No one, except a little girl. She's the reason you're alive." For a moment, Adrian said nothing. His gaze drifted to the far wall, and something in his chest shifted. Gratitude mingled with disbelief. "A little girl saved me?" Mark nodded. "She's 6. Her name's Emily Dawson. She ran to you, called for help, gave you water, stayed until the ambulance arrived." Adrian closed his eyes. Images began to stir in the fog of his memory. Tiny hands, a high voice, the faint scent of something sweet, maybe strawberries. He opened his eyes again, resolve settling in his expression. "I need to find her." Mark gave a small nod, already expecting those words. "I can arrange it." And as Adrian lay back against the pillow, the city beyond the hospital window moved on as if nothing had happened. But in the quiet of that room, something had begun, a thread between two lives that neither of them knew would change everything. 3 mornings after waking in the hospital, Adrian stood at the large window of his suite, watching Brookhaven move far below. The streets were a patchwork of motion, yellow taxis darting between buses, pedestrians weaving through crosswalks, the faint glint of sunlight off car roofs. Somewhere down there, a little girl with a stuffed rabbit had changed the course of his life. Mark entered quietly, holding a manila folder. "We found her," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Emily Dawson. Lives with her mother in East Willow Lane." Adrian turned from the window. "East Willow?" The words carried surprise. It was a part of the city that rarely crossed paths with his world. Mark simply nodded. That afternoon, a black sedan rolled slowly down the quiet street. Here, the sidewalks were cracked, and the paint on fences had long since faded. Adrian stepped out, the click of his polished shoes jarring against the stillness. In one hand, he carried a bouquet of white lilies. In the other, a small, pink gift bag. The door to the Dawson house opened halfway. A woman with tired eyes and warm brown hair peered out. Her voice held cautious politeness as she asked, "Can I help you?" Adrian spoke with measured gentleness. "Your daughter saved my life." The woman blinked as though she hadn't heard right. "My daughter?" Before Adrian could answer, a small head peeked from behind her leg. Brown curls framed a face both curious and shy. Emily's hazel eyes locked on his, studying him like he was a puzzle she wasn't sure she could solve. Adrian's expression softened. He crouched until he was level with her. "Hello, Emily," he said, his voice low and warm. "I'm Adrian. I heard you were the bravest person in this city last week." Emily's small fingers tightened around her mother's dress, but her lips twitched into a shy smile. Adrian reached into the gift bag and drew out a small box wrapped in white ribbon. "This is for you," he told her, opening it to reveal a silver bracelet with her name engraved. Her eyes widened as she touched it lightly, as if afraid it might vanish. Looking back to the woman, Adrian said, "I know this isn't enough to thank her, but I'd like to take you both to lunch, my treat." The mother's name was Claire Dawson. She hesitated, glancing between him and Emily. People like Adrian did not usually knock on doors like hers. Her life was built from long shifts, unpaid bills, and second-hand clothes, not crystal glasses and linen tablecloths. She began to shake her head. Then Emily tugged at her hand and whispered, "Please, Mom." Claire exhaled slowly, the fight leaving her. "All right," she said quietly. The next day, Emily found herself in the back seat of Adrian's car, wedged between her mother and the door. Her nose pressed lightly to the glass as the skyline rose around them. She had never been this close to the tallest buildings before. When they stepped into the lobby of a high-rise, Emily clutched her mother's hand tightly. The elevator ride was like floating. Every ding of the numbers climbing higher made her heart beat faster. Adrian stood beside her, glancing down at her wonder with an almost imperceptible smile. The doors opened to a hallway lined with golden accents. The air smelled faintly of flowers and warm bread. Above them, a crystal chandelier glimmered like drops of frozen rain. Emily's mouth parted in awe. "This is just the beginning," Adrian said quietly, as though letting her in on a secret. They were led to a table near a tall window that revealed the entire city below. The tablecloth was pure white, the plates heavy and cold to the touch, the forks aligned like soldiers. Emily traced her finger along the rim of a plate, glancing toward the dizzying view. "Is it all ours to see?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Adrian chuckled. "Yes, Emily, the city is yours today. You're my guest of honor." When the waiter brought warm bread rolls, Emily reached for one, then stopped, eyeing the 3 forks by her plate. Adrian noticed and quietly placed the smallest fork in her hand. "This one's for the salad," he explained, "but don't worry about the rules, just enjoy." Claire watched silently, her eyes softening. Emily had never been treated like this before, like she was important. As they ate, Adrian didn't speak of money or business. Instead, he asked Emily questions, his tone inviting. "What's your favorite game?" "Hopscotch," she replied between bites. "Favorite animal?" "Cats, the cute ones. Not the scary ones." He smiled at that. "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Emily sat straighter, pride warming her voice. "A doctor, so I can help people like I helped you." The words caught Adrian off guard. For a moment, he saw her small figure kneeling in the middle of the road, offering him water. His chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with illness. "That's a beautiful dream," he said, his voice quieter now. "And I believe you'll make it happen." When dessert came, small chocolate cakes dusted with gold, Emily's eyes went wide again. Adrian found himself laughing easily, a sound he hadn't made in years. As the meal ended, Adrian walked Claire a few steps aside. His voice was steady, almost formal. "I owe your daughter my life," he told her. "I don't want this to be the last time we meet." Claire hesitated, fingers curling around her purse strap. She wasn't used to offers that sounded like promises. But something in his tone told her this wasn't charity. It was gratitude, real and unshaken. From their table, Emily watched them, swinging her legs slowly. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light, and she turned it over in her fingers. She didn't know it yet, but this lunch was only the first crossing of a bridge between 2 very different worlds. The days that followed were different. Adrian began inviting Claire and Emily into moments that, in his world, were usually reserved for business partners and people whose names appeared in glossy magazines. They visited art galleries, where the walls glowed with colors older than the city itself. They walked through botanical gardens, where Emily stopped at every fountain, tossing in coins and making wishes she refused to share. But not everyone saw these moments as charming. In certain corners of Brookhaven's high society, whispers started to curl like smoke. Some questioned why a man of Adrian's status would spend his time with a single mother from East Willow Lane. Others were sharper, wondering aloud if it was wise for someone with his reputation to blur such lines. One evening, Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from an investor. It was short and sharp. Optics matter. He let the screen go dark without replying. A week later, he invited Claire and Emily to the Charity for Children Gala, an annual event held in a ballroom so bright it seemed to glow from within. Chandeliers spilled golden light over polished floors. The air hummed with the soft clink of crystal glasses and the faint melody of a grand piano in the corner. Claire wore a simple but elegant navy dress Adrian had sent earlier that week. Emily's pale blue gown made her look like she had stepped out of a storybook. As they entered the room, Adrian walked between them, one hand holding Claire's, the other resting lightly on Emily's shoulder. Heads turned. Some smiled politely, others looked away with tight expressions. They were halfway across the room when a man in a white tuxedo stepped into their path. His hair was silver at the temples, his smile too practiced. "You're bringing people from that side of the city into your world?" he said, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry over the music. "Interesting choice, Adrian." A couple nearby stifled laughs. Others paused mid-conversation, waiting for a response. Emily looked up at Adrian, her small fingers tightening around his hand. "Did I make them mad at you?" she asked softly. Something inside Adrian shifted at the sound of her voice. He crouched so they were eye level. "No, Emily," he told her gently, brushing a curl from her forehead. "You made me proud. You walked into this room and brought more light than it's ever seen." He straightened, his gaze locking on the man in the white tuxedo. "Some people," Adrian said, clearly enough for those nearby to hear, "think wealth is only about money. But I've learned it's about the people you choose to keep close." The man's smile faltered. Conversations resumed around them, the crowd's attention sliding elsewhere. Claire's eyes glistened, not from embarrassment, but from the way Adrian had shielded her daughter without hesitation. Later that night, Adrian led them to a quiet balcony. The city stretched out below, glittering under the moonlight. Emily leaned over the railing just enough to see the tops of the buildings. "Is this your favorite place?" she asked. "Not until now," Adrian replied, watching her face light up in the silver glow. Claire glanced at him, her expression somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. "You didn't have to say what you did back there," she said quietly. "I did," Adrian answered. "Because it was true." The gala continued inside, laughter spilling through the open doors. But out on the balcony, the air was cooler, calmer. For a while they simply stood together, three people from different worlds, sharing the same view. As they left that night, Adrian noticed more than a few lingering stares. The whispers would not stop. If anything, they would grow louder. But he also knew something else. He was no longer interested in living by the rules of people who measured worth in shallow ways. What none of them could have guessed was that the real test was still ahead. The tension was building, quiet but steady, waiting for the right moment to break. In the weeks after the gala, the quiet resistance around Adrian grew into something heavier. It wasn't loud or direct. It was the sort of pressure that came in controlled tones and well-chosen words, the kind that could wear a man down without leaving a mark. During a board meeting at Coal Industries' glass-walled headquarters, a senior investor leaned back in his chair and spoke with deliberate calm. "Adrian, we've heard concerns. People are talking about the woman and her daughter." He didn't say Claire and Emily's names. He didn't have to. This relationship socially might not be the image we need to project right now. Adrian didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted toward the skyline beyond the windows. The city was spread out like a map of his life. Every building, every street, something he had worked for, and yet the thought of cutting Claire and Emily out of it felt like tearing a page from a story he wasn't ready to end. By the time the meeting adjourned, the unease in the room clung to him like a shadow. That evening, the annual Coal Industries employee celebration filled the top floor of the building with golden light and the scent of polished wood and champagne. The ballroom was alive with the sound of a jazz trio, the clink of glasses, and the low murmur of conversations. It was meant to be a night of gratitude, a gesture to the people who kept the company running. Emily stood beside Adrian near the entrance, her small hand curled into his. She wore a pale yellow dress with a ribbon tied in her hair. Claire was across the room laughing as she helped Emily's paper bunny, cut out earlier from a program, hop across the marble floor. On the far side of the ballroom, a small cluster of investors gathered near the bar. They watched Adrian, as one might watch a chess piece that had wandered out of place. One of them, a man named Warren Langley, had a voice that carried even when he spoke low. "I'll be blunt," he said, swirling his drink. "That woman and her kid, they don't belong here. End it before it costs us all." Adrian heard the words even from across the space. He felt them land like a weight on his chest, heavier with every beat of the music. The air seemed thinner. The room seemed smaller. His fingers tightened around the edge of a nearby table until his knuckles whitened. A heat rose in his chest, then a cold. His vision blurred at the edges. He took a step back, then another. Someone called his name, but the sound came from far away. He found the balcony doors and pushed them open. The cool night air hit his face, but the dizziness stayed. His breaths came short and ragged, each one a little harder to hold. The city lights swam in his vision, the skyline tilting slightly as he gripped the railing. Inside, Emily had been chasing her paper bunny across the floor when she froze. She saw Adrian out on the balcony, his posture wrong, one hand pressed hard against his chest. Without a word, she dropped the paper bunny, weaving through the crowd with quick, determined steps. She burst through the balcony doors and ran straight to him. Her small hand gripped his much larger one with surprising strength. "Mr. Adrian, look at me," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "In and out, remember? Just like the doctor said." Adrian blinked down at her. The panic in his chest was still there, but her voice was an anchor, pulling him back from the edge. She placed her other hand lightly against his chest. "Breathe with me," she said, counting softly. "In and out." The first inhale was shaky. The exhale trembled, but she stayed there, her hands warm against him, her eyes holding his until the world began to steady. The pounding in his chest eased, and the city beyond the balcony came back into focus, the silver ribbon of the river, the moon high above, the hum of traffic below. From the doorway, Claire appeared, her face tight with concern. She didn't rush forward. She saw her daughter standing there, holding Adrian together in a way no one else could. When his breath had steadied enough to speak, Adrian's voice was rough but certain. "You saved me again, Emily." Emily gave a small, shy grin. "I guess I'm really good at it now." Claire stepped closer and rested a hand gently on his shoulder. "She is," she said softly, "and you're good at letting her." Adrian looked at both of them, the mother who had walked into his life without asking for anything, and the child who had become the quiet rhythm of his days. In that moment, surrounded by all the symbols of his success, he realized that this was the richest he had ever felt. Inside, the music continued, the party undisturbed. But out on the balcony, something had shifted. This was no longer just gratitude. It was something deeper, something unshakable. Adrian knew the whispers would grow louder after tonight. He knew the pressure would only tighten. But for the first time in years, the path forward seemed clear. The morning after the celebration, Adrian stood alone in his office, the skyline stretching out like a mosaic of glass and steel. Below, the city moved in its endless rhythm, but up here the air felt still, weighted by unspoken choices. He thought about Emily's hands against his chest the night before, her voice cutting through the chaos. He thought about Claire, watching quietly, trusting him in a moment when the rest of the room had turned away. He also thought about the words he'd heard, words that didn't belong to just one man, but to an entire way of thinking. A way that measured worth by the narrowest of scales. Mark stepped into the office without knocking. "The board is meeting in 3 days," he said. "They're expecting you to address everything." He didn't need to clarify what everything meant. Adrian turned from the window. "Then I'll address it." 3 days later, the annual Coal Industries Benefactors Gala filled the Grand Meridian Hall. Crystal chandeliers spilled light over hundreds of guests in tailored suits and evening gowns. The room hummed with the layered sound of conversation, clinking glass and the slow grace of a string quartet. Claire walked beside Adrian, her posture poised but cautious. Emily's dress shimmered softly under the lights as she clutched a small clutch purse like it was a treasure chest. They moved together through the crowd, drawing more than a few stares. Some faces smiled, others tightened. Near the center of the room, an older man with a voice as cold as polished marble leaned toward another guest. "He's really parading them in front of everyone," he said, not bothering to lower his tone. "He'll regret this." Emily's brow furrowed. She didn't understand every word, but she caught the edge in the man's voice. She looked up at Adrian, searching his expression. "They're talking about us, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Adrian's voice was calm when he answered. "They are." "Do we leave?" she asked. "No," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "We don't leave." The evening unfolded in slow layers, introductions, polite small talk, the quiet hum of disapproval from certain corners. Through it all, Adrian kept them close, guiding them toward the stage as the evening's formal program began. When the master of ceremonies announced his name, Adrian stepped forward. Claire and Emily stood near the edge of the stage, close enough to see his face under the bright lights. The murmurs in the crowd softened into silence. He began without preamble. "Some of you here know me for what I've built. The buildings, the deals, the numbers. But what I want to talk about tonight has nothing to do with any of that." His eyes scanned the audience, holding them still. "It has to do with who we are when there's nothing to gain." A ripple of unease passed through the front rows. Adrian continued. "Not long ago I collapsed in the middle of a busy street. Dozens of people saw me. No one moved, no one, except for a 6-year-old girl named Emily Dawson. At the mention of her name, Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she kept them fixed on him. "She ran to me," Adrian said, his voice steady. "She called for help. She gave me water. She stayed until the ambulance came, and 2 weeks ago she saved my life again. This time not from the pavement, but from the kind of fear that closes in from the inside." That night, she didn't see a man in a suit or a name in a newspaper. She just saw someone who needed help. The room was utterly quiet now. Even the clink of glassware had stopped. "If anyone here believes that kindness depends on your background, your bank account, or the neighborhood you come from," Adrian said, his voice rising slightly. "You are wrong. I've seen what real courage looks like, and it isn't dressed in a three-piece suit. It's wearing a yellow dress with a ribbon in her hair." A few people shifted in their seats. Others looked down, their eyes avoiding his. "I'm telling you this because we, this company, this city, this circle of influence, have a choice. We can cling to the belief that worth comes from status, or we can choose to recognize it where it truly lives." From the edge of the stage, Claire watched him, her chest tight. Emily's small hand was in hers, and she could feel the faint tremor of the girl's excitement. Adrian stepped back from the microphone for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then he spoke again, his tone warmer. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Emily Dawson Scholarship Fund, an initiative to provide education opportunities for children from struggling families across Brookhaven. This isn't charity. This is an investment in the courage and potential that exists everywhere if we're willing to see it." For a long heartbeat, the room held still. Then slowly applause began. It was hesitant at first, coming from a few scattered tables, but it grew, building into something that filled the hall. Adrian glanced toward Claire and Emily. Emily's face had brightened into a smile so unguarded it made the light seem dim by comparison. Claire's eyes glistened, though she held his gaze steadily. After stepping off the stage, Adrian rejoined them. Emily was the first to speak. "Does this mean other kids will get to do more?" she asked. "It means," Adrian told her, "that a lot of kids will get chances they might never have had." "And all because of me?" she asked, still not quite believing it. "All because of you," he confirmed. They stayed for a while longer. The mood in the room shifted, less guarded, more curious. Some guests approached, offering polite words. Others kept their distance, but even they seemed changed somehow, their glances less sharp. When they finally stepped outside into the cool night, the city lights spread before them like a field of stars. Emily skipped a few steps ahead, then turned back. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian looked at Claire, then back at Emily. "Now," he said, "we keep going." The answer was simple, but the weight behind it was not, because he knew the work was only beginning, and so did she, even if she didn't yet have the words for it. Perfetto. 2 weeks after the gala, the city woke to headlines that carried a name few had known before. In bold letters, across the morning papers, Emily Dawson Scholarship Fund launches, backed by Adrian Cole. Below the headline was a photograph of Adrian standing beside Claire and Emily, their smiles unpolished but real. The launch event was held in the same Grand Meridian Hall where Adrian had made his speech. This time, the stage was flanked by banners showing children in classrooms, on playgrounds, and holding books almost too big for their hands. The air buzzed with the kind of energy that came when change felt possible. Claire sat near the front, her hands folded in her lap. She still wasn't entirely used to being in rooms like this, but the difference now was that she no longer felt out of place. Emily was beside her, swinging her legs gently, the silver bracelet on her wrist catching the light. When Adrian stepped up to the microphone, his voice carried the same calm certainty it had at the gala. "This fund is more than a gesture," he said. "It's a promise. It's a commitment to seeing potential where others overlook it. And it's named after the girl who reminded me that real courage often comes in the smallest packages." From her seat, Emily grinned. Claire leaned over just enough to whisper, "That's you." "I know," Emily whispered back, barely containing a laugh. Adrian outlined the first round of scholarships, 50 in total, each one covering a child's tuition, books and resources for an entire year. He spoke about opportunity, about resilience, about how a single act of kindness could ripple outward until it touched lives far beyond the original moment. After the applause, guests mingled, discussing applications, partnerships, and plans for the future. Adrian moved through the crowd with ease, but his eyes often found Claire and Emily. At one point, he approached them with a soft smile. "This is only the start," he said, his tone directed at both of them. "I want you to see what you've set in motion." Claire looked at him with a mix of pride and gratitude. "I think she already has," she replied. In the weeks that followed, the fund's work began to take root. Letters arrived from families whose children had been selected. Some wrote in careful handwriting, others in hurried scrawl, but the message was always the same: thank you. Claire's life changed in ways she hadn't expected. She no longer worked double shifts at the diner. Instead, she managed a small community center that partnered with the scholarship program. Emily's world grew too. New books, new friends, and the quiet but powerful knowledge that she had made a difference. Seasons turned. The city shifted in its endless cycle, and then, one crisp autumn morning years later, a woman in a white coat stepped out of a taxi in front of Brookhaven General Hospital. Her hair was tied back neatly, a stethoscope draped around her neck. On her wrist, worn but still gleaming, was a silver bracelet with her name engraved. Emily Dawson had kept her promise to herself. Inside the hospital lobby, a man waited near the reception desk. His hair was touched with grey now, but his posture was still straight, his suit still sharp. When Emily saw him, her steps quickened. "Mr. Adrian," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of years. He smiled in a way that softened the lines around his eyes. "Dr. Dawson now, isn't it?" she laughed. "Still Emily to you." They walked together through the corridor, past rooms where the sounds of life and healing mingled. She told him about her first week on the job, about the patients she'd met, about how it felt to finally stand where she'd always wanted to be. "You know," Adrian said as they passed a window overlooking the city, "this place is going to be different because of you." "The same way my life was." She glanced at him, the weight of his words settling gently between them. "I think it's because you believed I could do it," she said. "I believed," he agreed, "because you showed me I should." Later that evening they stood on a small stage at the annual scholarship fundraiser. The crowd was larger than ever, the hall filled with alumni of the program, students who had gone on to become teachers, engineers, artists. Adrian spoke first, his voice still carrying that mix of authority and warmth. "This little girl saved my life, not once, but twice," he told the audience, his hand resting lightly on Emily's shoulder. "She didn't care who I was or what I had. She saw someone in need and helped. That is what this fund is about. That is what our future should be built on." Emily stepped forward, taking the microphone. "I was just a kid who didn't know any better than to help," she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "But I've learned that's not a bad thing. Sometimes the smallest hands really can hold the biggest hearts, and I think we should all try to be that kind of person, no matter how old we get." The applause was warm and lasting. In the front row, Claire watched her daughter with a quiet pride that filled her from the inside out. After the event, Adrian and Emily stood together on the balcony outside the hall. The city spread before them in a wash of lights. "What now?" she asked, echoing a question she'd once posed to him years before. He looked at her, the reflection of the city shimmering in his eyes. "Now," he said, "we keep going." And they did. The Emily Dawson Scholarship Fund continued to grow, touching more lives each year. But its story was never just about the numbers or the reach. It was about a moment on a hot city street when a little girl with a stuffed rabbit saw a man collapse and decided, without hesitation, to help. Because in the end, that was the truth Adrian had carried with him since the day he opened his eyes in the hospital. That kindness doesn't care where you're from, how much you earn, or what the world thinks you're worth. It comes from the heart, and when it's shared, it has the power to change everything.